everyone. This afternoon we have an eclectic mix of high-performing individuals with backgrounds in art, music, sports, and education from California to the Midwest and the East Coast. I'm Rudy Ruiz, and I'm glad to share with you that today, in partnership with 99 Pages, we're kicking off the first in a three-part discussion of the book, Stealing Fire. As we dig into the first section today, the first three chapters, we'll hear from these individuals a variety of perspectives and experiences that they've had on how to use these centuries of exploration across these different fields, along with modern neuroscience, to know ourselves better, how to master our minds, to find greater purpose and fulfillment. Before we begin, I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to introduce himself and share briefly why he agreed to discuss the book with us. First off, I'd like to introduce my coach from Stanford University, Jay Jackson.
Hi, and Rudy, thank you for setting this up and letting us all be here. I'm going to start by saying I'm not an expert on flow, but I'm very interested in it. How you get people there, how you get there yourself. And I'm a high school teacher in Fremont, California. I teach sports psychology and I teach a world history class. I also work with Spartan Race on an educational branch to their brand called Spartan Edge, where we're trying to teach students and older people basically the best way to take on challenges. And the ultimate goal for that is flow state, trying to put all these pieces together to lead to flow state. My purpose when it comes to education, the reason I'm teaching and the reason I coach wrestling as well, is to make students and athletes better and have more successful versions of themselves and happier at the same time, because you can get better and improve yourself and not be happy. But what's the point of that? If you put those two things together, getting better, improvement, and being happy, it all leads to flow state. So I'm very, very interested in this conversation. I was very, very interested in the book, and I'm curious what everyone has to say.
Thanks so much, Jay. I also want to introduce Mustafa Waheed. Mustafa has provided some great insights for me over the years, and one of them was actually recommending this book to me. And so I want to give him a chance to introduce himself as well.
Rudy, thanks for putting this together. Excited for everyone that's in the room. Mustafa Waheed, in terms of background, Chief Executive Officer over Transitioning You, and we help college students graduate using their cell phones. And what really brings me to this work is both interest of my own of having a background in cognitive psychology and also helping students. At the end of the day, part of college and part of education is to empower people to change their lives. And with flow, you can really tap into different parts of yourself that otherwise aren't accessible consciously. And so to be able to kind of work through that and have a book really break down some of the language for it is exciting. And then to be able to have a discussion with a group of people from different backgrounds, to be able to look at it from different approaches is by far the most exciting part of today.
Thanks, Mustafa. Looking forward to hearing your insights this evening. And I also have a great pleasure of introducing Robert A. Douglas. Robert actually is our executive producer for this session. I'm really very grateful for that. And we've been collaborating quite a bit these days. Robert, why don't you say a little bit more about yourself?
Hey, everybody. I'm Robert A. Douglas. I am an author and filmmaker. And what interested me in participating in this discussion was simply because self-reflecting over the last few years, about 3 years ago, my life was probably in the best professional space, but the worst personal space. And as a result, I suffered a lot of things, but I've also learned a lot of things along the way that's prepared me to receive some concepts in this book. And I feel like I've had the experience to be able to conceptualize it and help bring tangible, actual goals for people to be able to implement. So I'm glad to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Robert, not only for behind the scenes work, but for being here in front of the camera as well. I also want to give a chance to Bennett to introduce himself. He's tuning in this afternoon from the Monster Lab. So why don't you tell us more about that, Bear?
How's it going, everybody? Thanks again, Rudy, for setting this up. Should be exciting. So I own the Monster Lab. It's a strength and conditioning gym out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Haven't been around very long, so we're just getting going. Also, I coach wrestling at basically all skill levels. We don't coach college, but we do have a lot of guys that have gone off to college that come back and wrestle with high school kids and middle school kids, so it's fun. I'm real excited about this, though. Everything that I do in my life at this point is all about trying to be the best performance possible not only for me, but for the people that are depending on me, the kids that are depending on me to coach them correctly, and the people that are, no matter what their goals are, they're counting on me to help them get there. So I think the mind is the first thing that needs to change before your body or anything else can. Everything else comes with it. But if you don't have that strong mind, then you're worthless. So I think the strength of mind in this book is really what made me want to do this and really sucked me into the book. So I'm really excited.
Thanks so much, Bear. Before we get going in the conversation, I also want to give you a little bit of background on myself. Really glad to be connected to each of these guys through various stages of my life, really. And, in talking with Mustafa last year, he kind of was pointing out to me that even though I had been through some really challenging times these last several years, that I still had a smile in my face, I still had my head up, and I was still coming up with different ideas and innovative approaches to doing the work that I do, which is as a social entrepreneur. So primarily through education, my goal is to make a positive change in the world. And I've been doing that in different parts of the country. And right now I'm doing that as a partner with 4 Point Education Partners, which is a national education consultancy. But I'm also doing some new work in connection as well with this the book discussion. You see my logo over here, the Rudy effect, and really the encouragement that I try to share with people when I see them in person, working with Robert and others to figure out ways to really do that at scale. And so as I've been thinking through, what's underneath, what you're seeing when you interact with me, I'm realizing that just like Bear was saying, what's happening inside, my mind and what's happening inside your mind when you're at your peak performance levels is really critical for people to understand how to make it through these tough times like everybody's been through this year. So I thought this book would be a great starting point for us to discuss. And so I've got a few, prompts that I'll bring up and questions that I'll ask, and really looking forward to hearing insights from everybody based on their experiences. And so the first chapter is called "What is this fire?" And by the subtitle of the book, it talks about the fact that you've got Navy SEALs, you've got Googlers, you've got literally Buddhist monks that all have something in common. And this is not a joke. There's no punchline. It's what's happening inside the mind and the different approaches that they're taking to reach these different states of consciousness. So they talk in the beginning of the book about the Burning Man event, which some of you may be familiar with out in the desert, and the fact that the Google founders actually thought that the Burning Man event out in the desert provided an important step in selecting their CEO that could guide them from their early $100 million stage out to now where they're making billions. So I'm wondering if anybody has their own version of that. What helps set people apart in your mind as far as thinking about who you want to work with, and who you want to do, business and life with together. Jay, you look like you might have something to say about that.
I do. Yeah, as a teacher with my students, ideally you want them into flow. And what you're looking for, I think, as a teacher is for the bell to startle them. Like they're so involved in what you're doing in class that the bell goes off and they have no idea, how long they've been there, how focused they are based on them being in flow. If you can create that in a school, you're going to create creative thought. You're going to create hard work. You're going to create happiness, and it's going to be a great situation for everybody. When it comes to coworkers with teachers, I'm looking for people that are positive. Like if you're having a discussion on how you can improve a lesson or how you can improve the school, if someone's being negative about it and trying to shut down your ideas, then that's not someone that's going to get you into flow state. You want someone that's going to, have their own ideas and bounce those ideas off. So for students, I'm looking for the person that takes the challenge in class, which is typically an open-ended project where they can put their time and effort into it and kind of lose themselves in that project. For coworkers, I'm looking for people with positive ideas that are building off of your ideas instead of trying to tear them down. So that's what I'm looking for when it comes to flow. And those are my personal burning men.
Excellent. How about you, Robert?
Yeah, Jay, I thought what you said was very important, because coming from an education standpoint, when Rudy asked that question, And when I read it in the book, I challenged myself to think about, what those standards were in my life. Because, good help is so hard to come by, right? You have to kind of compromise in a sense, those standards. But I was able to create that in my classroom, just like you said. And I think that was a powerful illustration, because now I have to figure out how to transmute that into other areas of my life. But to create that level of grit and oneness in a classroom of very adaptive minds was something that I readily did. And you just gave me an example in my life. So I have to try to figure out how to transmute that into my business world. So thank you for that.
Very good. Mustafa, you and I have something in common in terms of thinking about ways that technology can, help young people through education. As the CEO of an ed tech company, what's your perspective on this? What's your thought around that connection with Burning Man?
Sure. I thought it was really fascinating. It was a great selection tool for when you're building something. And one of the lines early on in the chapters really resonated. I believe it was in this chapter, which was, talking is too slow. Where the Burning Man component, and when you're building a company or building a culture, building a team, there are these moments, like those implicit moments where you're in lockstep and the person just kind of, as we say, gets it. And you can see that in a classroom too. The second, like, you're playing with the student and there's a pitch and catch and they really get what you're saying and they're following along and they're trying to create new things from there. And I like the component that it ties into is you're looking for people that come from a place of abundance, which is one of Stephen Kotler's other books that tie in. Is there's a sense of optimism, there's a sense of progress, and there has to be a shared sense of progress with a startup team and a startup culture to say, hey, we know that the odds are typically not stacked in our favor, but because the vision's so compelling, we're willing to work towards this in a way that's both fun for us intrinsically, and as a team to say, this thing is worth doing and worth building, even if we may fail. And it's both from the sense of optimism and a sense of abundance to the sense of progress, of going, hey, it's worth it. Because if we don't do this, it's worse.
Very good. One of the things I liked about this book, and I think that Mustafa, you and I shared in this, is the fact that the book provides some new terminology and words that you can use to talk about experiences that you've had that perhaps before you didn't have any words for them, right? And
Yep.
So in chapter 1, one of the terms that they introduce is NOSCs, non-ordinary states of consciousness, and they put those into 3 main categories, right? Flow state, which we've been talking mainly about, but also a second one, meditative state, and then the third one, psychedelic state, which I think is a little bit more of what Jay was alluding to as far as, maybe the more dangerous areas, if you will. But even in terms of those first 2, flow state and meditative state, I'm curious for you guys, for me, reading the book is like, wow, my faith background and my spirituality, like as a kid growing up, spending literally, a year in an hour every day in silent prayer 5 days a week for a couple of years. I didn't realize the connection that was happening in my mind between that and the way I can get into a flow state athletically and seeing the connections in the brain. And so I thought that was such a powerful aspect of the book for me. How about for you guys, as far as those connections between these different states of consciousness, even in this first chapter, did anything come to your mind from your experience?
Yep.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mustafa. Yeah.
I was gonna say, definitely for me, I played ice hockey. I picked it up late. I picked it up around 13, and it was interesting. Of looking by 18, I was playing for the varsity all-star team and playing for travel teams. And it was interesting in terms of that learning curve and realizing I spent so much of my time kind of getting into states of flow for that accelerated learning and kind of going through it and understanding, like, wow, I was a goalie, and so it was nice because a lot of the work is just repetitive work. Into a career or make a glove save here 100. So when you see it in a game, it happens. And it was interesting to look back and go, oh, well, actually, if I wrote it down on paper that was going to happen, I wouldn't have believed it. But that is directly translated over into the classroom in terms of practicing certain lines or transitions from slide to slide, and even in business. So it's interesting how that connection really come through.
Great examples. I think I missed Robert, so I'm going to go to Robert and then up to Jay.
I'll come in after Jay.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, as a parent, I have 2 boys, and when they're toddlers, that's when you really see flow state in action, because toddlers are not concerned about what they look like or what people think of them. They're just doing their stuff. They don't, that prefrontal cortex is not quite formed yet. So in watching, with my first son, my wife and I were really into, teaching him all the sign languages and stuff. And this means more. So when he was learning to walk, he was kind of wobbling around and he had a big smile on his face and he fell. And he didn't care about making the mistake. He just got right back up again and, more, I want to try it again. And just watching that makes me think that's the way I want to be. You want to, and you're talking about, Mustafa, you're talking about ice hockey. If you make the mistake, you want to be the person that's like, more, I want more of that. Doesn't matter. Teaching, same thing. Make the mistake. Don't care about what people think. Get in that flow state and just be happy with it. So I'm kind of, I kind of look at it like a toddler's mind or an infant's mind. And I think kindergartners, for example, are much more in flow state than I see in high school. And I think there's reasons for that. But I want my high schoolers to be more like a kindergarten, to be excited about learning and not so much worried about grades and where they're going to college and things like that. So that's what I was going to say.
Great additions. What would you add, Robert?
I think for me, a very important part in reading that was the fact that I'm 32 and I feel like I've accomplished like a good deal of things in my life, from sports to whatever. But looking back on my life, it was really a plumb line for me, because I've always been operating at either peak performance or at an alternate state of consciousness. I don't think I've ever operated where they both existed. And so as a result, I get spurts of flow as opposed to that continuum. And really unlocking that for me is really like what I feel is the next, the missing link to really accomplishing a lot of the things that I want to in my life. So it really served as a reflection tool for me to figure out what moments do I feel my best, when I'm at my peak performance, and what moments help me to feel that altered state of consciousness where I'm like, trying to solve problems through that subconscious mind. Really fusing those two together is a tough part for me, but it really helped to outline that for me and be able to give me next steps in going forward.
Excellent. So one thing I didn't mention in my introduction is that I'm also wrapping up my doctorate at Johns Hopkins University School of Education. And one of the things that Johns Hopkins is well known for is their work around neuroscience, and particularly the connection between neuroscience and learning. And so as I was reading through this book, that was one of the things that I really loved as well, was just seeing the connection between what I was learning at Johns Hopkins and what I had experienced on the wrestling mat, in church, and in my life essentially, and being able to connect the terminology and those experiences. And so one of the pieces that I thought was cool was just how in the book they break down the fact that in your brain, typical brain, running around taking care of business, doing life, your brain is operating at these high frequency beta waves essentially, and how as you're moving into these other states of consciousness, your brain begins to downshift into these more low frequency alpha waves, and sometimes even further they describe later in the book into theta waves, and potentially even other frequencies. But not only are these brain waves changing, but also the chemicals in your brain are changing. And we know that whether it's kids in the inner city that are under stress, or any of us that are under stress in certain situations, we've got these chemicals like cortisol coursing through our brains that makes it difficult to make some decisions and do certain things. And so while at the same time as the brain is downshifting from high frequency beta to low frequency alpha, you're also beginning to experience more of these happy brain chemicals, right? Like dopamine and a handful of others. And so I really loved seeing those connections, and was curious whether you all had some shortcuts that you use to downshift your brain to get into these states faster. Jay, what would you have to share about that?
I was gonna add a question.
Yeah.
And but I like your question. I like your question too. But how often are you guys in flow state? Like for me, I can answer not, it's not very often. I think there's different levels of flow state. But when it comes to deep flow, I can say just a handful of times. What about the rest of you? And then I am very interested in Rudy's question about the shortcuts. Like, what do you do to get there?
Cool. I definitely have some responses, but I want to give Bear a chance to respond first, and then Mustafa.
I think I'm actually in flow a lot these days. I've grown a lot, as a human being in the last year, like a lot. But I think I lost track along the way somewhere of everything that was instilled in me. You know what I mean? And I think getting back to it now and just really trying to be a better person and trying to give back and coach and everything that I'm doing is like you you almost get so in the zone with everything that I'm doing now, and I'm trying to pour so much into everything that it's like I get into it all the time where I get into one thing and I lose track of everything else. So I know that's where I'm at. And then the next thing that I get into, it's the same thing. And it's like, it's all been positive. And it's, I feel like, once people like really stop trying to search for that flow state and what's going to get me there and just put your nose down and grind and figure it out. And you know what I mean? And once you get there, once you stop, realize that you're actually searching for that state of mind, you're in that state of mind. And I mean, you guys all know like what's possible when you're there. You know what I mean? It's incredible. So I think without,
Bear, can you say a little bit about how you help others foster that in your lab? Like, what does that look like in your lab?
man, that's one of the biggest things I teach everybody that I coach is it's all about mindset. I say it all the time. Monster mindset. It's your body's going to give up. You know what I mean? Especially if you're somebody who isn't really working out all the time, your body's going to give up. When you push your body, that's the point. Is you want to break yourself. If you haven't broke yourself, then what have you done? You haven't worked out. You haven't done anything. You know what I mean? You're keeping yourself at a steady pace. You might as well be moving backwards. If you're not pushing yourself and trying to get to those zones where you're just shocking yourself every time you do anything, then you're not really doing it.
So Bear, since we haven't been in there, I've got a peek, I feel like, through some of your videos, but since everybody hasn't seen them yet necessarily, if somebody were to like open the door to the Monster Lab, like what does it look and sound and feel like versus like Planet Fitness or something?
Oh, it's gritty. It's hard work, man. I don't care about how pretty everything is and everybody coming with matching shoes and matching shorts and got your socks and you're standing in front of a mirror for 3 hours and you do like 15 minutes of work. That's cool. If that's what you want to do, that's awesome. But I really just, I don't have a desire to work with you at all. I want people that are coming to work. You know what I mean? Like, because I work too.
So is it group sessions? Is there music playing? Like what is it? What does it look and sound like?
Loud music, basically me yelling and you sweating. I do group sessions too with a couple of the guys that I've been training for a while, and I mean we get it in. It gets pretty crazy.
Cool.
Everybody who leaves is dying. You know you worked out.
Can we? I see you mouthing words, but can we hear Aaron?
Oh, can't hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Cool.
Oh.
Why don't you, Aaron, go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'm gonna, after you do that, I'm gonna put you a little bit on the spot just to kind of help make some connections here in terms of the fact that chapter 1 was talking about group flow, and I was talking earlier about kind of the connections between like on the spiritual side, what's going on, within the church, and then also on the like athletic side, what's going on, within sports as far as those flow states. What does group flow have to do with it? Tell us about that after you've introduced yourself.
Hi, my name's Aaron. I'm Rudy's brother, Aaron. Yeah, I just wanted to say I heard you can hear me, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to say I heard Mr. Bear talking about I was thinking about it this morning as well. I want to say I'm from where Rudy and I look, I got this tattoo. It means never, like basically means I'll never be stopped. You can never stop me in Afrikaans. And then this is a keyboard that I drew and my friend Josh tattooed it on me. I was thinking about this morning. The whole thing is like I used to really bellyache about we get like right now, we get, especially now with the solstice, we get like 8 hours of sunlight a day. So I used to complain about it a lot. So now, like for example, I've been going for this run, and instead of, because I told my therapist, which I've been doing, by the way, Rudy, long time no see. Another thing too is like I don't get to talk to my brother that much, so I was like really looking forward to this. I figure if I'm a little bit late, it's okay. But so I've been running in the morning, and I told my therapist, well, I do this thing called theta healing, where like we do this guided meditation, and then that's a whole other thing. But I told her, hey, you know, I've been going running, but I see these American flags, and they've been making me really mad lately. They've been making me really mad seeing them, and I don't think that's the right way that I'm supposed to be feeling. So update for her was last week. I was like, you know, I ran by and I was like, you know what? I like those flags. Those are okay. So that was good. But then this morning, I just wanted to say, to Bear's point, I was thinking the pursuit is a pursuit. That wisdom, even the not to be like, oh, the Bible is like whatever, but so my girlfriend and I own a coffee shop, and I told a customer today, I was like, look, not to be favoring religions, but the Bible. I was paying a fine. I told the lady because she goes, oh, I'm sorry, because she goes, oh, this is over there, and then I was like, okay, I paid that. Well, this one's over there. Sorry, you got to go there. I'm sorry, I'm annoying you. And I go, hey, you're helping me out right now, and so you know, not to favorite, you know, Christianity, but the Bible says administration is one of the gifts of the Spirit. And she goes, oh, really? And I go, yeah. And then so that kind of, you know, got her, because that's the thing, is like the Bible also says that we're supposed to pray without ceasing. And so to Rudy, I know you would probably maybe not had spoken about when we were younger. He was the first drummer at our church, and you told me an anecdote about you used to go in. You guys, the regiment you had for, you know, basically meditating every Sunday morning.
Right.
Anyway, I said I'm gonna pause there. You guys can pick up somewhere.
Good additions. I did mention that part, yeah, about the daily prayer and the connection there. Mustafa, I think you had something to add as well on this point.
And what Aaron said specifically about, you know, talking to a therapist and mental health and tying it all in. But the fascinating component of group flow at times, and the selflessness, which it talks about later in the chapter, is it allows you to heal. And particularly with businesses, what's fascinating is how so many businesses unfortunately go under. And particularly with startups, you have founders that are more likely to face depression and anxiety than a normal individual, simply because of the stresses of running an organization. And what happens is, and Jay, I really loved your question because it's very tactical about how do you get into flow and how do you foster and when are you in deep flow. I think, and it ties in here because with my students in the classroom, one of the things I talk about is you have to find that thing that you almost cannot turn off. And it ties in, Rudy, to your point of, so my undergraduate degree was at a Jesuit institution, and we talked a lot about vocation. And it was interesting because I loved world history. Ties in with you, Jay. I really, really love the fact of in history there was a ruler called Akbar the Great, and the beautiful thing in India during the Golden Age is he brought scholars from all over the world, all different religions, all different backgrounds, and held court and allowed them to share what they were going through and their different opinions and different backgrounds. And I think the beautiful thing about finding meaning, particularly one of my favorite books is Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. And it ties in so much to psychology, is a lot of how we look at the world, tying in with there, is mindset. And our mindset can dictate how we look and change the world. And in flow states, it really allows you to change the stories, as this is later in the book, allows you to heal, allows you to create from a new space. And what that really does is it puts you in a completely different. One of the things that is super tactical here, one of the things that I try to spend more time in the mornings getting into deep flow is, for me, it's been writing. A great book recommendation I have is through Julia Kent, wrote a book called The Artist's Way. And it's interesting because she kind of blends it with, she calls it like AA for the creative. But she specifically says someone who's kind of lost touch with their creativity. And it ties in here because she goes, every morning, if you can, write just 2 pages, unfiltered, that serve as kind of emotional windshield wipers, or just to kind of write down those, if you will, the inner critic in your mind. And so for me, what's cool is to, once you put that down and you start kind of getting into this practice, it's actually allowed me to get into deep flow because I'm no longer worried about, hey, did I write that down or am I going to capture that? No, it's here. Now, what do I really want to get under this narrative in this story? And, Jay, to your point, you find those short moments of deep flow, but they become really extremely productive.
Yeah, Jay, it looked like you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I love all that. I'm going to check out The Artist's Way. It sounds very interesting, because flow is so difficult. Because when you're in it, if you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in flow, then automatically you're out of flow state. It's such a hard thing to grasp. I will go back to your question earlier, Rudy, and relate it to what Aaron and Bear were saying. And when it comes to getting to flow state, again, I've been in super deep flow just a handful of times, but I can get myself in other levels of flow basically with 4 things. If I'm talking like gratitude gets me there, challenges get me there. If I'm just focused on the present, it gets me there. And then if I scare myself. So this goes along with what Aaron was saying. You said you saw those American flags and you didn't have gratitude for that. And that takes you right out of flow state. Now it's going to be hard in your case to be grateful for that. But if you can find a situation where you're grateful, then that takes all these negative thoughts out of your head, and you can get yourself into flow. Challenges. This is what Bear was kind of talking about. If I can give myself challenges that are at or just above my ability level, then I've got to, be able to put myself in flow state, or I'm never going to accomplish those things. If I give myself a challenge that's way too high, then I'm going to be thinking I can't do it. If it's too low, it's boring. But if it's right at the right level, that's where I want to be. Just focusing on the present. And this goes along with gratitude. If you're like petting your dog and you're just focused on, I'm petting my dog, this is great, then that can get you in the flow state. And then the final thing is scaring yourself. Like if you've ever driven and like a deer runs in front of your car and you slam on the brakes, you're immediately in flow. You're not thinking about anything else. There's all those endorphins hit you and dopamine, and you're there, and you're never more focused than in that situation. Now, I don't want to go around looking for deer personally, because I think that's going to be a problem. But like I take cold showers every morning and I don't like it, and I know there's other benefits for cold showers, but I think the mental benefit is I'm not thinking about anything else. I'm thinking about this cold water on me. So it focuses my attention. So to answer your earlier question, those are four things I use. But again, I haven't gotten to the point where it sounds like, Mustafa, you've got a better handle on it, that I can get myself into deep flow on demand.
Those are great strategies. I'm anxious to add a few more to that, but I want to give Bear a chance to speak up as well.
I wanted to say something too, because of Jay mentioned it. You're all these different things, all these different like feelings and emotions that can get you into this flow state, like an instant flow state. A lot of the time, that's why I went through and kind of read the book again, or like went through it and listened to it again. Because I'm not gonna lie, I didn't read it. I did the audio book, but a lot of the time was me trying to figure out if adrenaline is what gets you into this immediate thank you, into this immediate flow state, and I think a lot of it was me trying to convince myself that adrenaline is it, that's all it is, you know what I mean? But I think it definitely, like like when you get those big adrenaline dumps from whatever the situation is, like a car accident or something crazy, or you're getting your hand raised after a gold medal or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like those adrenaline dumps come with so much that like your body goes through, that I think you automatically just arrive into that flow state. And really, when you start coming down from it, because I mean, like, I'm sure everybody has felt it, but I know that Rudy and that Jay have felt it wrestling. When you get you get those bursts of just like superhuman, right? And then all of a sudden, the next 45 minutes, you're like, oh, like you can't do anything. But all you did was go hard for, 45 seconds or whatever it was, or however long it took to get that takedown into that pain, and just here it comes. But it's like you just worked more than you've ever done in your life, and it was all in like that real split second. I think that adrenaline dump is a huge part of the whole flow state, but I think there's a lot more that goes on with it as well, and I didn't really realize that until getting later on in the book. But I just wanted to add that.
That's great. Robert, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I know you want to push the conversation forward, Rudy. I just wanted to really quickly just challenge the thought in the room, because the illustration of the Navy SEALs kind of shows or illustrates to me that you always have to be able to access flow state. Even when you think you have a given time frame, that's part of that timelessness, right? To be able to go to, that's part of that flow, to be able for it to be seamless within our day-to-day interactions. And maybe that comes through the merging of consciousness, is what I started to get, that it kind of, your flow state kind of isn't as independently tailored as we would like, because like in the wrestling room, right? If you are given that superhuman energy, your teammates are going to feed off that. They're going to get into that flow. They're going to push their bodies a little bit more, and it becomes a merging of consciousness in terms of making weight, or defeating this team as a collective as opposed to an opponent. I'm not saying you're wrong, Jay. I'm just saying, like, my takeaway was from the perspective of always having it readily accessible. Maybe not always dwelling in it, but being able, as that Navy SEAL, to snap in and know, I'm going right because Rudy's going left, and we thought we had more time to prepare for this, but we have to be able to be in sync like now. So that was my takeaway.
That's great. So part of the reason I would be with bear on essentially having to like listen to the audiobook a second time is, again, the fact that there is so much terminology introduced, and while it's helpful, it's also a lot. But for me, if I had to boil down the book, one of the pieces, of course, being a kind of a scholar athlete, I think about flow state as being like one highlight of the book. But then when you get to that question of like, yeah, but how? To me, even though it's a very kind of technical jargony word, or two words really, I feel like my big takeaway, as far as like to answer your question, Jay, like functionally what happens in your brain, how do you get there, is transient hypofrontality. And as like complex and complicated as that sounds, and I think probably Mustafa, you gave me the heads up over lunch one day before even I read the book about that term, but essentially it's temporarily turning off that prefrontal cortex that you were talking about earlier, Jay, so to get to that toddler-like stage, so I think that's one of the things that I loved about the book, was just realizing like those hours and days and like a couple of years of doing that, silent prayer had me trained my brain basically to be thinking about God instead of thinking about myself. You know what I mean? And then in the same, that I was able to then use my brain to then, when I got into, on the wrestling mat or wherever, to use that same functionality to switch it on, more quickly. And again, in reflecting back to, certain moments where I felt like I really wasn't in the flow state. I remember the first time somebody, introduced the term of being in the zone to me, which was like, is of course kind of like the sports version of that. So when I was 16 years old, I was a Greco-Roman national champ. And afterwards, one of the coaches, said, "Oh, you look like you were really in the zone." And I at the time I said, "Yeah, I didn't really know exactly what he meant by it, but it was like, that sounds about right about how I felt." And there were certain aspects to the experience that fit right in with what was described in the book. And so when I dug back to kind of understand what was going on with me in terms of like preparing for that moment and getting to that stage where, facing 9 opponents from around the country, I gave up a total of 4 points. And, going into like the semifinal match, it was like, it wasn't even to me like a thing, like I was gonna win. It wasn't, the semifinal match didn't even matter. And so in terms of like what led up to that, the week before in the training camp, while everybody else was, enjoying being a teenager away from their parents for a week and, doing little misbehaving things around, the college campus, like I was in relative isolation, and I was sitting there listening to, Enigma, and which essentially now I'm seeing these connections, like the chanting that they're referring to in the book, which is like these ancient, techniques and technologies to get to these flow states. Like I was fostering that without even realizing what I was doing. And so to me, that was really fascinating seeing that in the book. I've been talking a lot. I see a couple guys want to add in here. Who's next? Mustafa?
Happy to hop in off that.
Yeah.
Robert, to tie into your point and then adding to Jay's and bringing Rudy's home. So Robert, I thought it was interesting in the book to talk about the Navy SEALs, but what was really interesting is the millimeter by millimeter preparation that they were talking about. And one of the ways to kind of get into flow states, and Rudy, I love the fact that you talked about in the zone, because that was exactly like how I learned about it and then started looking into flow. You study other athletes who've kind of broken that down. For me, it was studying Kobe Bryant, right? And Kobe, specifically hearing him talk about when he scored 81. And it was funny because that same season he had scored 70. And the coach, I think it was like 65. And the coach is like, hey, let's put you back in so you can get 70. He's like, no, I'll use it when we need it. What was fascinating is hearing him talk about how, just like you were going through those little steps of preparation, and you would almost built an entire routine to allow your brain to have those neural pathways to just go, this is the only thing I'm focused in on. One of the most underemphasized parts of the book, and Jay, I love how you kind of implicitly brought it out, was actually like the tactical steps of, Kobe talked a lot about studying John Wooden and how he would even teach them how to put their socks on. Because he realized that if you put your sock on the wrong way, it would bother you in the middle of the game that could potentially take you out of that flow state. And so it's those little things of, what are those things that are effortful in your day that you can make one decision or take it away. For me, I've been reading a lot of Peter Drucker recently, and thinking about entrepreneurship, you've got to tie it in with innovation, and it's inherently tied with flow. You're just more creative. And one of my favorite lines that he talks about is this idea of, for you to create something new, for you to create something innovative, you have to build slack in the system. You have to take something out. And I just don't think we talk about enough of like preparing for flow and innovation and creativity by, hey, what is an active decision you've made to remove something out of your life? It could be an email, or for me, one of the things every single morning, for the first hour or two that I wake up, I turn off all notifications. And so if I just want to turn over and write, I write, and there are no notifications on the phone, and then I can move to anything else. But just those little things have been surprisingly helpful.
Great. Jay, a response?
Yeah, I just had a question for Mustafa and Rudy. So a lot of the book is talking about how to quickly get into flow state without having to put in the effort. But both of you, are you both saying that it's better to work for years to put in the effort towards flow state, or do you think the author is correct that there are some ways that you can get to flow state faster than practicing meditation for years, for example?
Ooh, so taking that right off the bat, I think the authors are right. I think you could hack your way into flow states really quickly. But with that, I think you need at least a couple of years of training, or have experienced it in a way that's intense enough so you can recognize it. But for me, hacking my way into flows really quickly is just like taking distractions out of the equation. That's one of the first ones to go, okay, now I'm not focused on anything else. This is the thing that I'm here, and making a decision. Like every morning I know I'm going to write. And so it's removing that decision. So it almost instantaneously allows me to get into flow.
Yeah, I would echo that, Jay. And I think even though for myself, I think, they give examples of, Buddhist monks as well, 30 years of meditation to get these deep levels. I think for myself, even though it was, those hours, by understanding what was happening in the brain, that allows me to get there faster, essentially. And I think, again, I would echo Mustafa's strategies in terms of the fact that, for me, in particular, so much decluttering, you know what I mean? Around, my workspace, around the house, and, even in terms of, like you said, trying to go on what they call in the 4-hour work, a low information diet of, figure out the ways to curate information so you're not having to deplete your mind over the course of the day with trivial things, and giving your creative mind as much, space and minimize distraction as possible. I think I've got Robert, or actually, sorry, Bear, and then Robert.
You're going to retract that because you basically said exactly what I was going to say. So.
All right, Robert, why don't you go ahead?
All right, so we're going to go to some of the comments that are in the chat from our listeners. And the first one being, I'm going to show on the screen, from Damon Brown. He says, I didn't read the book and I have my own opinion on this, but in speaking about training, can you get into flow state without training? Bear, do you want to tackle that, Bear? I see you shaking your head.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's different for anybody. I don't think it's so much as like, I think training to get into it, absolutely. Once you realize what makes you get there, because that way you can, like, you know, like how you the SEALs did it, they can just turn it on and off. You know what I mean? But I think at first there is no training to get there, and it's different for everybody. It's passion. You know what I mean? That's my take on it, is whatever somebody's truly passionate about, that consumes your mind. You know what I mean? So that consumes everything that you're doing and everything that you're putting into it. So I think once you realize what it is that gets you there, yeah, then absolutely train to make it a stronger being in your body, but and being able to get it right away. But I think I think, and that's earlier too. I believe it was Jay that said, kids, you know, how you feel like they can really, they're just in like a constant state of flow, you know, euphoric, they're always happy, you know, unless they're mad. But when it, like, because they have no other distractions, it's everything that they do is passion, you know what I mean? So when you're passionate about, like, we'll go back to wrestling, I'm sorry, but when you're a wrestler and you're wrestling, you're not thinking about anything else that's going on in life. You're not thinking about any bills that you have to pay or anybody who's on your mind. You're thinking about wrestling and winning, and that's it. And you know, you learn that at an early age, no matter what it is, whatever your passion is, that's going to come out, and you're gonna get into that state naturally, and you're not even going to know you're there until, like Rudy said, somebody mentions it to you, and you're like, well, okay, well, that's what that was, you know. That, but I think it can definitely be built upon, for sure, absolutely. But I don't think it necessarily needs training to come out initially, not at all.
Well, what would you add to that, Jay, and then Mustafa, and then Aaron, actually?
Yeah, I was reading in the private chat. Aaron said exactly what I'm going to say, which is, yes, you can absolutely get into flow state without doing the training. So drugs are a great example of that. You know, you can do drugs. The problem is when you do it without the training, then it starts potentially becoming dangerous. It doesn't have to be dangerous, but it could be. They have virtual reality can get you in a flow state. And I don't know if you've seen the Oculus things, but they have scientists and psychologists working overtime on those games, you know, where it's like, it's electronic music going on and you're in this virtual world, and it can definitely get you in a flow state. I will say the time I've been in deepest flow is when I had a stroke. You know, 2.5 years ago, I had an arteriovenous malformation in my head, and it exploded and led to a bleed. I was working out at the time and I didn't know what was going on, but it was just this selflessness feeling where I felt like I was part of the universe. It felt really good. You know, you'd think a stroke would feel bad, but it felt fantastic. You know, timeless. I wasn't really interested in what people were saying, because it was just noise. You know, when I'd have to really focus to find out what they were saying. When I was talking, I wasn't that interested in talking. I just was into being, and it felt good until my prefrontal cortex kicked in and it started saying, this is not healthy. And then I started to, you know, get a little nervous, but my whole right side was paralyzed and I had no idea, you know, because I was just in this wonderful state. But to answer the question, yes, you can get in a flow state with these other things. However, a lot of these things they don't have to be, but they can potentially be dangerous.
Great points. Mustafa, why don't you jump in?
To second the points made by Robert, Jay, and Bear in this is, yes, you can get into flow states without training. I think the distinction that we're making here is the difference between it happening, like, and it being transient, like once in a while, versus finding a way to get in there continuously. And I love later in the book, there's this idea of hedonic, basically things that put them into calendar, kind of look into that flow state so you can have them continuously. And I think that's super, super important to just kind of think about, well, what are those things that make me feel good, and reevaluating, saying, and it ties definitely into work ethic too, because training in most connotations for most people, they'll look at it as a bad thing. But the whole point of this book that you can distill down to is the people who are the most successful Googlers, the coders, were the ones that actually enjoyed the training, the work, you could say vocation, as they did in Google. And so it's, yes, you can get into flow states without training. What the training really does is it allows you to consistently move towards something you already want to move towards. And the way you can get tactical about that is put it in your schedule to explore the things that you want to explore. And it's interesting because then it ties into so many pieces of creativity, and it ties back into flow.
Very good. Aaron, did you want to jump in there? All right, let me go up to Bear. I think you had something to add as well.
Yep.
Oh, just caught your audio at the end.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to your message on the group chat. Training between flow state and physical training at the gym. It is completely different. Training at the gym, you can actually get into a flow state. You know, obviously a lot of people do when you're at the gym. You know what I mean? When you're in the zone and you're doing what you're doing, you get into them. But it's completely different when you're at the gym. You're not training to be in a flow state. Okay, the flow state is completely different than actually working out. It's not something that comes with it. It's something that has to be kind of harnessed and like unleashed on it almost. Totally different things.
One of the things that's been fascinating for me, kind of as a Johns Hopkins student, is that I'm realizing that I'm somewhat unique in terms of people that have experienced these states, different categories essentially, and so I think I'm gonna give somebody else a chance to jump in, but I think there's some connections here that we can delve into. Mustafa, are you next?
Sure. I want to tie into Brooke's question in terms of the fight or flight response or flow.
Yeah, I just wanted to close this one out really quickly, Mustafa. Then I'm gonna make it appear on the screen.
Perfect.
Really, Jay, did you have something to say?
Just a question for Bear. You know, when it comes to training, is it the training that you enjoy, the physical training, or is it the flow feeling that you enjoy? Like when people are training, you know, and you consider it your passion, is it the feeling of flow that's your passion, or is it the actual training, do you think?
That's actually something that I actually had mentioned to Rudy too a couple of days ago in email. But I think so, not knowing it was the flow state, thinking, you know what I mean, that it was the actual working out and, you know, the intense things that I do. I thought that was what I had, like, the, you know, addiction to, if you want to put it that way. But that's what I loved, you know what I mean? And reading this book, and like I said, I've gone over it a few times now, and it's because I'm learning more about myself, right? Like I think I've actually been able to kind of push that flow state a long time before I knew anything about this book or what I was doing or what this was. You know, like my dad told me when I was a kid, you know, like you get into this weird zone, like, before your matches, and like now I know why. You know what I mean? But it's I think for a long time I thought it was the work and the grind and everything that I do and everything that I know that I put into it, but I think I was just catching that flow state, and that's what it was. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not sure.
Good.
The piece I was going to add is that, you know, again, in terms of like education researchers, like learning scientists, it's, since they haven't necessarily, for the most part, experienced the athletic side of things, they kind of say, oh, here's this neat little hack that we found. You know, while you're doing a long study period, if you take a little break and, you know, go for a little jog, you'll actually learn more and retain more. And I think for myself, it's kind of like, that's not a coincidence, you know, and for myself, if I know, you know, it's like Abraham Lincoln's old quote about, like, if you've got 8 hours to, you know, chop down a tree, spend 6 hours, you know, sharpening the saw. So for me, like if I have an 8-hour workday and I know I have a big task to accomplish, I'm gonna make sure I fit a workout in there. You know what I mean? Deliberately, and not just for the exercise, because I know that when I get back after that workout and I sit down, I'm gonna be in that creative flow state I need to be in, like intellectually, to do the work that I do, on the professional side. And so for me, it's like, taking advantage of understanding what's happening in the brain, and then, playing the two off of each other. Robert, did you want to add?
No, I think we have Aaron.
Thanks. Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say something about how kids and playing, and I was gonna bring it full circle, kind of, or try to, how playing for kids is they're also in a flow state, and so like also with Rudy being in wrestling as a wrestling club as a kid, we were being in a flow state, as a child, and then so like for me, even with video games and sometimes and it comes from trauma sometimes, but like say self-isolating, I'm gonna go do this or that. Like so Rudy, like Elle, we have a niece named Elle, and like Dad was just saying, he'll go in there. She'll be in in the office, the corner room, for like she's 4, and she'll be in there, and she doesn't really talk too much, but she'll be in there for like an hour, and like, what are you doing? She'll say working, and she have these little Post-it notes with just scribbles all over it. So she's in a flow state. You know what I'm saying? So that's all.
Very cool. We're getting down to the last few minutes. We haven't said a whole lot about chapter 3, and we do have a couple more discussions coming up, over the month, essentially, that I'm hoping others can and you all can join us for. But the 3rd chapter talks about what was alluded to at the beginning of the call, which is essentially different taboos in different areas, different cultural taboos, and was wondering if that really stood out to anybody, and if anybody had any particular point they wanted to highlight on that area. Aaron.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, I wanted to bring this up before, and I forgot. There's a law, because I just finished reading this book by Graham Hancock, America Before. I just finished it, and I read all 3 appendices, but he said in there, and then I fact-checked it with Google, like, there's laws in Montana where if there's, like, he said 3 in the book, but I guess it's 7. If there's 7 or more Native American people, you're allowed to kill them. Because that's, whatever. And so basically, like, so that's, like, they can be murdered for going in the flow state. So I wanted to just throw that in before the next discussion.
Thank you. I think I'm going to have Jay share a comment, and then I'm going to give Mustafa actually a chance to have the closing word.
Yeah, when you're talking about taboos, whether they're religious or state imposed, I think those are there for a reason, to keep people safe. A lot of people want this flow state, but then once they get it, they can take it too far. I think churches want you to get in flow state, but they want you to do it safely. So, meditation, prayer, chanting, those things all get you into flow state, but they take a lot of time. When it comes to the state, I think the state is just trying to keep you safe. Like drugs and versions of like MDMA, things of that nature can get you into flow state, and probably very small levels, but people will enjoy that state and take it too far. So there are rules with those types of things. If it leads to an addiction, I think I have a problem with that. And that could be video games, like Aaron's talking about. You can get addicted to those things. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to pull you in. Drugs, you can get addicted. They had that monkey experiment in the book where they talked about these monkeys had electrodes in their pleasure centers, and they just kept pushing it. They didn't eat, they didn't sleep, they just kept pushing these pleasure, sensations. If we go too far, we're going to end up being like that. And then finally, I'll just say this: I think those things are in place because you don't want a cardiac surgeon working on you that's getting to flow in too quick of a way. You don't want someone that's on drugs or alcohol, working on you. So I would prefer the person that did the training, that got themselves in the flow state every day and perfected their craft. Just my opinion.
Great point. Mustafa, why don't you close this out?
Sure. So tying into the taboos, I thought it was a really fitting chapter during our existing political climate, both from just different parts of the nation and different components coming together. Regardless of where we sit on either side, what's really fascinating is seeing throughout humanity, throughout history, and Aaron bringing up, there are different viewpoints of humanity. Graham Hitchcock going through. Another one is Howard Zinn talking about a people's history. It's a fantastic book. What it really breaks down into is understanding that it's both a group exercise, but it's also an individual exercise, if you will. You're kind of tapping into this thing that is both you and not you. And it allows you to really see both you and the group around you collectively, but also clearly. And so it's fascinating because the taboos, once you're aware of them, it's just like in cognitive science, they talk about like the cognitive misers or like the different biases we have. Once you're aware of it, you can start to kind of work through and look and go, hey, you know what? Maybe this is pulling me in a way where it shouldn't. Let me find a culture or find an environment that could really feed me. Because at the end of the day, and I think Bear, you're doing such a good job of creating a space and a home for everyone to be able to walk into from whatever point in life. It doesn't really matter if you've got matching socks, matching shoes, color your skin. None of that matters. What matters is as long as you're here to do the training and find what is meaningful to you, and you're discovering it through you, whether it be a group activity or an individual activity through groupthink, which I love that they talked about in Stealing Fire. They had different personalities that they have. You can go in and do their courses, right? That is really fascinating because that chapter for me really stood out of going, what are the taboos are effectively the people that try to kind of say you can only access flow through this container. It's only okay under this flag. But that's not it at all, right? The whole revolution is flows happening everywhere. Are you a part of it? So I thought it was a really fascinating way to say, hey, we can move these barriers aside and it's open to everyone.
Very good. Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, everybody. Great first discussion. Looking forward to the subsequent ones.